Alrighty, we're finally going to have an update for the MR2. We are still tracking down the funky suspension issue. Currently we've got the wheels off and actually just did a little bit of a motion test of the tie rods on both sides. And I'm thinking that I might have a failed inner tie rod, even though these were replaced not that long ago. I'll obviously throw the video in here. But what we're going to be working on in the meantime, at least, is basically just installing some roll center adjusters. This should be a fairly easy process, and honestly with this car being lowered, it's probably needed anyway. Generally speaking, all we've got to do is just remove these two bolts, one on the outside here and one on the inside, to remove the lower ball joint from the control arm. That'll separate all of this, and then this roll center adjuster. There we go. And then this roll center adjuster will basically act as a spacer to go in between the two and basically push the lower control arm down about 1 inch, which should put this lower control arm back in the stock configuration, which, even if it doesn't fix the steering issue, is probably at least going to help with the overall geometry of things, since it has been lowered. Here are the coilovers, of course. So yeah, we'll tear into this and see what we can do. All right, here's the articulation on the driver's side. Pay attention to the motion of the inner tie rod, or the whole tie rod assembly as it is. Right now we are at full lock to the right. As we move the steering back in, comes in straight, comes in straight, comes in straight. And then it's like it overextends and even locks out right here. We'll bring it back to full tilt to the left. And then we'll bring it all the way back to where it's steering right. And you can see that's pretty normal. All right, now if we look up under here at the, I think this would be the caster and the whole adjustment of the coilover unit here. So right now we are at full lock to the left, and you can see how it's kind of leaned a little bit. The bottom is leaned forward here. Now if I rotate this back, the entire assembly moves quite a bit, where it changes the actual angle here of what I believe is the caster to about here to here. So I'm wondering if that's what's going on with my suspension play. We'll go to the other side now. All right, here we are on the passenger side of the car. Same test. We're gonna watch the tie rod assembly as it rotates. Right now we're at full lock to the right. Moving to the left. All the way, you can see the steering rod practically stays straight. Now we'll bring this all the way right. And it does move, but it doesn't lock out as bad as the other one. So I'm wondering if this is possibly an inner tie rod situation. And then we'll look at the caster. Well, what I believe is the caster. It has a similar motion. So right now, again, we're full lock right, full lock left. If anything here, I almost feel like this is a little bit more straight up and down than on the other side. So rotate right, rotate left. Alrighty, so sit rep. I actually now have the roll center adjuster on the driver's side. It wasn't that hard. The kit, for some reason, includes those larger, like I think they're 19mm head bolts, which is bizarre because this system uses a 14mm head, but they give you these sleeves. It's like they know that, right here, it's like they know that potentially they've made this for maybe more than one application. So I was able to put the sleeves in the roll center adjuster there, and then I was able to just find longer hardware, which I was able to pull from my stash. But anywho, it's on. But I was looking again at this steering issue, and one thing I noticed, and I think this could be part of the problem with why this is maybe overextending this direction, is if we look at this outer tie rod, now there could be maybe a manufacturing difference in these tie rods, but there is absolutely, I mean, there's like 2 threads, maybe 2 threads left on this inner tie rod for any kind of adjustment. And when I was extending this, or pulling this back in, again, I just felt like that's a little bit too much movement for that. And I was like, you know what, it's like, it's acting like that rod is too short. So when I decided to compare it to the other side, which we'll go look at, it's not as drastic of a difference as I was expecting. However, you can see we have a ton of threads on this outer tie rod. So I'm wondering if potentially this whole steering rack is off center, and that's maybe why it looks like I've got a much longer rod, especially if you just look at even kind of a quick comparison here. I'm fairly certain I've got a longer rod, or maybe that's even an incorrect inner tie rod, potentially something to look into. But I think it's something to look at and see if maybe I could take this back to an alignment shop and have them kind of reset this rack and make sure that it's even on the tie rod length from one side to the other, unless there's supposed to be a difference in size or whatever. But yeah, we'll continue and get this roll center adjuster on the other side. Alrighty, we are finished with the passenger side here. Again, same scenario with the bolts. I actually had to find my own set since they weren't included, unfortunately. But as I was putting everything back together, and we had as a test removed the sway bar end links to see if they were catching or binding here on the lower control arm, which I can definitely say right now with the control arms, or the sway bars and the end links connected and everything, there's definitely a big difference on the overall clearances. Before, when I would raise the car off the ground without these roll center adjusters, those sway bars would just rest right there on the lower control arms. Now I'm told that's normal when it's up on the ground, and then when it lowers, the sway bar moves up out of the way and there's no clearance issues. But what I always worried about is if you were to unload on one of the corners, would that sway bar be hitting the lower control arm? And it probably wasn't happening before, but it's definitely not going to happen now. But to kind of further my theory on the tie rod situation, while I was putting everything back together here, I noticed I had some marks over here on the passenger side wheel well that I just confirmed do not exist on the driver's side. And if you were to line up what that is right here on the back of the coilover, where the right there, where the sway bar end link connects. So what it definitely appears like is happening in some way is, as this wheel is under load and it's moving around, even though right now there doesn't seem to be any issues, there's definitely situations where this has been hitting the actual chassis of the car, which could explain the weird fighting that I'm getting in the steering wheel. So that gives me a little bit more to kind of think about and maybe see if there is something to do with these tie rods being wrong. That is definitely weird though. I just noticed that for the first time. So I'm hoping between any of these things that we've looked at, we'll be able to figure out what is going on with the suspension.